for July 25, 3:15 in the afternoon. And if I could, I'd like to take a roll call. So, Councillor Kate,
Present.
Councillor John Tabor,
Here.
Mr. Lynch,
Here.
Mr. Furman. And the chair is here as well. And Deputy City Manager Woodland is present.
Is here.
Thank you. So if we could please, in the packet which the Deputy City Manager just prepared, you'll find draft minutes for May 11th, which I've added sections describing this comments by Deputy City Manager as well as Councilor Tabor. And if I could get a motion, please, to approve. Mr. Furman. And a second?
We're doing both at the same time?
I'll start with May 11th.
I will second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Opposed? Then if we could also please take a look at the July 20, which was this last time. And if I could get a second, please.
I will second.
All in, any discussion?
Chair, I'm going to abstain because I wasn't present for this meeting.
Right. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Opposed? Okay, now we come to the unsealed minutes from there are too many piles. These are not correct. These are old. I see. The unsealed for February 15 and 24, just so that you're aware of what's been done in terms of the redactions. These were unsealed as of the 20th. I don't think that requires an approval.
No.
So then I'd like to turn to, and we're still dealing with old sealed minutes, to the June 29, 2021 sealed minutes. And I think the people here have seen the redactions as proposed by Deputy City Manager. And I think that I have, frankly, some concerns about this because of how extensive they are. And I understand this is non-public, but this also happened under former Councilor Ruda's tenure as chair. And so I would like to ask her, if this is okay with all of you, to invite her to comment on the unsealing of these minutes, because it really reflects on the meeting which she chaired.
One option that exists for the committee is to enter non-public session to discuss whether to unseal non-public session minutes. And if you choose to do that, you could invite former Councilor Huda to attend.
Okay. I don't have the proper citations of letters and numbers and,
I'd say describe them as best you can.
okay. Well, then, I would entertain a motion to go into non-public to discuss the sealed minutes and the possibility of unsealing them for June 29, 2021. And I would further entertain a motion to include former Councilor Petra Huda, who was the chair of the committee at that time. So if I could get a motion, please.
Make a motion on both.
Thank you. Do I hear a second? Is there a second for that motion?
I have a point of clarification request. I would like to ask for legal advice.
Sure. This motion will be for the purpose of discussing whether or not minutes should be unsealed.
Okay. So here's my request on point of clarification. If those of us who are present were not part of the committee at the time, and if we do not have a quorum of individuals who are a part of the committee, can we unseal minutes that do not include us?
Yes,
Or-
it's the committee's determination, and the committee as it sits when the day it makes the decision.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Opposed?
Chairman, I have to abstain. I wasn't here at the time.
That's what, I'm going to abstain as well.
But
I think we
I
just-
wasn't, yeah.
I think we just heard that this is an issue in front of the committee. So, I mean, you're welcome to abstain all you wish to, but I think that this is an issue that's relevant for the committee's business. But you're choosing to abstain.
I will oppose.
Okay. And I'm voting in favor, so that's 3-1.
So what I'm going to do is
Please, to unseal the minutes from June 29, 2021 for the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Audit Committee.
I make a motion that we unseal the minutes from the June 29th meeting.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. Let's see. I need some guidance in terms of recording these minutes for going into non-public, then going
I can-
back out again. Can you
I
help
can-
me with
yeah.
that? Thank you. So, but it was, okay, thank you. Hi, Ronnie. And Deputy City Manager Woodland, I can't remember, I think that I signed or did a date approved as a sealed minutes, but now will Cynthia
Yes.
recast these?
Yes.
And then I can date those also?
Yep, and we usually just type in the date, so.
Yeah, I saw that, so that's perfect. Thank you. So then, I have these sealed minutes, and I don't want to discuss them, but I have individual copies, I think I've got. So what I'd like to do is to wait on further discussion of this until you've had a chance to review them. Actually, I just have 3, I'm sorry. But if we could just hold that.
You could move that item to the bottom of the agenda, and that way, if you need to go into non-public again, you might deal with your other issues.
Okay, all right, but if you had a chance to look at them by then?
I might, while I'm sitting here, it depends.
Okay. Okay, so now we move on to the RFP. Deputy City Manager Woodland, do you want to speak to the changes that you've made? In your
Sure.
draft, please.
What I shared with the committee is a document which has a couple of revisions from my version that I shared at the last meeting. Specifically, there was a small change that I thought I should add to the introduction, just to flag at the beginning that there is an audit committee that will be involved in making a recommendation to the city council, and that was just a housekeeping matter to kind of tie it in. In terms of the paragraph 9, which is on page 6, as I was kind of looking over various parts of this, I added a section that specifically refers to the governing body as may be required, because, as I mentioned at the last meeting, the auditors were very clear that they will take items of specific concern directly to the full governing body, depending on, if there's something very serious. And so they're going to do it anyways, but I figured I'd add it in here. And why I was noodling over and going back over this provision is that I was trying to figure out if there was a place within this document to kind of get at what I heard from Jesse about, well, is there some place where the audit committee could see like a final draft, if you will, of the audit report and the MD&A before it goes to publication? And so I was noodling that over on Sunday, actually, and looking at this and figuring out, well, maybe we can put something in here. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. If a draft document is being circulated to a whole committee, it becomes a public record. And, I couldn't come up with any grounds for, let's assuming that it's not, there's nothing illegal or goes to material irregularities that might implicate, like a privacy interest or a personnel interest that would allow you to go into non-public session. If it's just a draft and everything's relatively okay and there's some management advice, but it's, no material concern, then there's no way to go into non-public session that I could think of. So then you, as the audit committee, would be getting a draft ahead of its formal publication and distribution to the city council. So I was like, I can't figure out what language I could put in here that would allow that kind of midstream or towards the end of the stream look that wouldn't really make it public, a couple of weeks before we generally roll it out, when it's all bound and we've got the copies and can get them at the library and schedule a time with the city council and the audit committee to meet. And I asked, and the reason why, among the reasons why Bob is here, is I asked him this morning, I said, am I missing something here? Am I, is there something I'm not thinking of? And he said, well, what's the purpose? What is the reason you would go into non-public? So he can talk to that, but that's why you don't see any additional language here, because as I was trying to draft something, I was like, it doesn't fit because you're a public body. So it's really hard for a public body to be midstream in a process or even, towards the tail end of the process because of the way the right to know law works, at least here in the state of New Hampshire. And then I'll just flag the other point, and then you can ask any questions you want. I talked to the finance director as we were kind of noodling out whether to try and see, to have them tease out this whole issue of whether to get a number for the non-attest services. And I think one of the things that we learned is when they're bundling those two pieces together, there's a lot of overlap in the sense that they're using similar work product. And so we weren't sure that you could get a number, they could put a number on it, but I'm not sure how real or useful it is. So we didn't see the value of pulling it out. I'm happy to keep listening, but as we were noodling it over, and again, based on what I heard through the process last time, because we've got them combined, it's not sure how valuable that number's going to be. I did put back in the 70 and 30 in the qualifications section in
Thank
the
you.
weighting. So
Page 14.
that is in there as it was in last year's. So those are my pieces.
Counselor Taylor.
Yeah, before we get into further discussion of this, a legal question, parliamentary inquiry for Bob. So we have Suzanne's draft here, and we were also given a draft from the audit committee. So my question is, can appointed citizens on a committee create their own RFP, and can that then become the RFP that's used by the city, or is that contrary to our charter and our administrative code?
I think the answer to that question is no. The work of the city, the government, operation of government is sort of generally divided into two categories, policymaking and administration. And city staff, the administration, perform the administrative functions. The administrative functions, the direction of which is determined by policymakers. This board, this committee be policymaking committee, city council's policymaking committee. But once the policymakers have determined the direction to go, it's the administrators that go in that direction, perform the actual work.
Okay. And then a follow-up question, just based on what Deputy City Manager has said. Is there any way under RSA 91A that the council or the audit committee could meet with the auditor when results are done, to have a non-public session without staff there. In other words, the council or the audit committee as the council's proxy and the auditor, but no staff, to just really
There
have.
would be a way to do that, yes.
Okay. Great, thanks.
But that would be in non-public.
That was the question, yes.
Yeah, so is that contrary to what Deputy City Manager Woodland just stated?
No, she was talking about a different situation. The question concerned at the end of the process. She's talking about at the beginning
Midstream.
of the process.
Great, thanks.
Any other comments or questions? I would like to respond to the line of questioning that you were raising about the role of the audit committee in this, and that I think that, and the GFOA booklet speaks to this, that it's the audit committee's job to come up with the RFP. Now, whether or not that complies with how the city has operated and this distinction between administrative and policy making is, I think, immaterial. That the point that the audit committee needs to focus on is, again, going to best practices of the GFOA and the New Hampshire Municipal Association, is to tease out the critical components of what we, as the audit committee, think should be in the RFP. Now, as we saw last year, the city can choose to do something entirely different, but still, it's the audit committee's job to determine what it wants to have in that RFP. And I think that we've already fleshed out some points of disagreement, which I think helps to make for a better RFP eventually, because we should be partners at the table with the city staff in trying to develop the best possible RFP that fully achieves the charter's objectives. And so for that point, I guess I would disagree with the conclusion that you and Bob were going towards, that it's really the city staff's job. Yes, I understand that the city staff has to do the procurement process, et cetera, but the audit committee is here to advise, based on our professional expertise, the direction and the qualities that we want that RFP to embody. That was the first point. I'm struggling to remember the second point I wanted to make. This happens with age, I think, Bob, doesn't it? Yeah. Rats. It will probably come to me as we continue our conversation. Did you want to say something, Councilor Cook?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would say I don't disagree that it's the role of the committee to provide directions and qualities of what we would like to see generally in the RFP. But ultimately is the role of the staff to write the RFP, because it's a legal document that the city is required to abide by. And we hire professional legal staff at the city level to make sure that we have, that we're abiding by all the rules that we need to follow with regard to municipal law. And that in the end, when we have a response to an RFP, it creates a contract. We create a contract with those that respond, and the contract is driven by the way that this RFP is written. That's why we hire professional staff to do it. It is entirely reasonable for this committee to provide direction, to provide some qualities of, like, this is generally what we'd like to see. But ultimately, I think the drafting of the language comes down to the staff. And that is not only the way that it has been done, but that's the way it needs to be done to protect the city.
Thank you. I think that the attorneys can certainly weigh in and flag areas that are clearly shortcomings of the RFP, and they should do that. I mean, we rely on them to do that. The last thing we want to do is to establish something that would harm the city. But by the same token, from our point of view, and here I'm speaking as a professional with 30 plus years of experience using auditors' work, there are points that go into, and the GFOA booklet speaks to this quite directly, the importance of the audit committee managing, for instance, the audit process, not the entity that's being audited. And that's a critical component which was missing in last year's audit, and I think is missing in this year's, last year's RFP and this year's RFP. And because it's missing, I believe that the quality of independence that we seek in our auditing process is also deficient. And that's a real concern that I have as chair, that the quality of independence is deficient in the auditing process because of that.
Well, I take those points. My concern has been having members of the audit committee write a document that the city staff would then have to implement if it were passed by this committee, or that would be the implication. And I don't think that that's how our city manager form of government works. If we want to have appointed citizens writing RFPs, there need to be some council vote to allow that. I don't think it's a good practice. I think the concerns that for independence that you have, the concerns for the content of the RFP can be relayed to staff. And I think the way Portsmouth operates as a city, we then have staff run the RFP process. So I would object to, I would vote against an RFP that wasn't written by the staff who has to run the process. I fully support instructing staff and coming up with a document that reflects the consensus of that discussion.
Of which discussion?
Guidance from this audit committee. But I think the ultimate, the way our city operates, the ultimate decision when it comes to drafting the RFP and pencils down, this is what goes out to the public, goes with staff.
Yep.
So you said providing guidance, and I think you said suggestions to city staff. Are you saying that the audit committee should set in broad strokes what should be in there? An interim meeting, for example. And it's city staff's responsibility to simply, or not simply, to draft that in a way that works and protects the city.
If we can do that, I think that's
Okay.
a good way to go. I think I wanted to explain if there's a vote on the audit committee developed RFP, why I would vote against that.
But we could take a vote based on the city's draft and insert provisions from Chairman White's version as well. I guess I'm still processing your first comment on, if I heard you right, basically your opinion is that the audit committee cannot meet with the auditor midstream prior to the final audit being complete.
I guess there's a slight nuance, which I had envisioned based on the last conversation, that you wanted to see a draft document. Any draft document that's circulated becomes a public record, and
Okay.
so that was the piece there. I think that's,
Yeah,
just to be clear.
And I won't speak for others, but my thought there was it was a meeting, midstream update where the auditor and the audit committee could meet independent of city management and discuss how the process is going, if there were any issues. So I would be comfortable with an RFP that didn't require any documents to be disseminated.
So I guess, Bob, that goes then to based on what Jesse is asking for, though, would that be a public meeting?
Well, of course, every meeting has to start as a public meeting, so the committee would call it a meeting. And then in order to go into a non-public session, you have to have one of the reasons that the statute allows you to go to a non-public session. It may be that one of those, I think, could be on point. And that is, one of the reasons that public bodies are allowed to go into a non-public session is to consider matters which, if discussed in public, would likely affect adversely the reputation of any person other than a member of the public body itself, unless such person requests an open meeting. It may be that if there was, depending on what was in the report of the auditor at the time the request was asked, that's an item that would allow a non-public session. There's also an allowable purpose for non-public session where legal advice is necessary. If legal advice was necessary for the audit committee to talk with the auditor, that would be another reason. It's difficult to project all the possible facts that might exist at the day that you might want to do it. But this is the way I was thinking at the time I answered Councilor Tabor's question.
Okay, because what I'm suggesting is a standing one-time meeting, so it wouldn't be prompted by any issues. So I guess that's a different.
It's very difficult to have non-public sessions in New Hampshire government, but there are some ways, and those are the obvious ones.
Which goes back to my point, is when I was looking at the RFP, there's that section that says the minute there's anything material or possibly illegal, that becomes an obvious, to fit into the category of what Bob just explained. When the auditor's coming to someone and saying there's an issue, then you've got the non-public need obvious. So that's our kind of challenge.
Councilor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. I would argue that there's no need. I don't see the need for the audit committee to meet with an auditor midstream. If you're hiring an auditor, you're expecting them to be independent, and you're expecting them to conduct their business appropriately. If they find a challenge, they will come back and request a meeting to discuss that. And that is clearly outlined in the draft RFP here from the city. And in fact, the line was added that they may even discuss it with the governing body as may be required. But it essentially just adds extra time to the requirements for the auditing firm, that they're already conducting the business that we've hired them to do, and they are going to report back. To me, it's kind of a waste of everyone's time. I don't see the point of having a report back at all unless there's some material problem found in the audit. Then we would expect to hear from them.
So, and Jesse, I don't want to jump in on what you're raising, but I think that the concept of an interim meeting certainly is part of what the GFOA recommends in terms of good governance, best practices. Is it a waste of time? I would contest that it's not, because what you're trying to achieve is the good governance that we know is so important. I think that inevitably, the auditor will come up with issues or questions. They may not rise to the point of what is in this draft for, a deep concern or whatever, but they may still merit a conversation. We'd like to get some clarity, for instance, on how deep to go into this point. Is this really significant enough to merit a deeper discussion? And that the audit committee should be able to give some feedback on that. They may say, well, that's an excellent question, and that's something that should be raised with the entire city council, for instance. I don't know. But it gives a different forum for the auditor, different from discussing these points with management, which is where it stands now. And I think that is the critical component that we're seeking to, and what the GFOA booklet would seek to introduce here, is that it's not simply going to management to seek guidance on resolving questions or points of audit. Yeah.
Chair, I would respond to that by saying that I don't think the auditing firm, or any auditing firm that I know of, would not immediately go to the governing body or an audit committee first if they actually had serious concerns and questions around irregularities in the audit, material issues. I think it makes an assumption that you're hiring an auditing firm that doesn't understand who they report to, essentially. And any auditing firm we would hire understands that ultimately they report to the city council, not to the staff. When an auditing firm goes to the staff during an auditing process, it's asking clarifying questions about the finances. They're not asking questions about material irregularities. Those questions would automatically go to the governing body, and the governing body might direct them back to the audit committee to have those discussions if they didn't come here as well in the first place. So what I'm saying is that when you hire an auditing firm, an independent auditing firm, we have to trust that that firm is here to do their job and that they understand what their job is. And I don't think that we've ever been in a position that we, as a city, had an auditing firm that did not understand that. And in the future, no matter who our auditing firm is, I think that this committee will select a firm that is qualified to make those calls. It's unreasonable to tie them to a meeting that is not necessary first and foremost, but also creates the, I guess, the image in people's minds that there's a problem when there's not necessarily a problem.
Councilor Tabor.
I think since Bob has said that at the end of the audit, there can be a sort of executive session between the audit committee or audit committee and council and the auditors without staff. There's the chance to probe. There's the chance to ask about materiality of anything that was found. There's the chance to talk about internal controls and to go in depth about strengths and weaknesses of the finances of the city. So to me, the interim meeting is not necessary with that provision. And frankly, I think it's a solution in search of a problem.
Any further comments?
Yeah, I would just say that, so certainly we'd expect every auditor that we hire to be independent and to be of high quality. But the GFOA does specifically state that best practice is for the auditor to report to the audit committee and suggests ways around it if you're a government that may have some obstacles. So, yeah, you just want to make that point that is the recommendation. And it doesn't imply by us doing that we don't trust the auditor or there's something happening. It would be a standing meeting that would happen every year. It wouldn't be a special meeting if we can do it.
So I personally look to the GFOA booklet for best practices. I know that in the governance committee, you've been doing the same thing. So I don't see why we should be ignoring the GFOA on this point. And personally, I would strongly urge the city to incorporate some interim meeting between the audit committee and the auditor without management present. It may be that what happens is that they sit down at the table, they say, why are we here? And they get up and leave. But I suspect that a good auditor will take full advantage of that opportunity to discuss matters apart from city management. And I don't know what will come up, but it's simply a matter of good business practice, if you will, to incorporate that in the process. So I'm not sure where we bring this to a head, but I guess what I would like is first of all, I want to recognize that you've included the cost, the 30%, and I very much appreciate that. The other issue of non-attest and audit quotes, I think are important. I would want to see those in the final RFP, but that's not a hill I'm going to die on. The hill I will die on is one of having an interim meeting along the lines of what Jesse is suggesting, and just as importantly, along the lines of what the GFOA recommends. So if I could get a motion, please, to recommend to city management to incorporate an interim meeting between the auditor and the audit committee as part of the RFP, please.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Is it handy to get the GFOA page that's on?
33.
Just read it to us.
quite lengthy.
You guys up for that?
Yes, please, yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
Question 17, what should be the relationship between the independent auditors and the audit committee? An important benefit of an audit committee is that it helps to preserve and enhance the objectivity and independence of the financial statement audit by furnishing a forum in which the independent auditors can candidly discuss audit-related matters apart from management. That's underscored. Therefore, the documentation that formally establishes the audit committee should expressly state that the independent auditors are to report directly to the audit committee rather than to management. Likewise, specific provision should be made for the audit committee to meet privately with the independent auditors as necessary. If a government is subject to a sunshine law or open meetings law, RSA 91A, it is recommended that such legislation be amended to expressly permit the audit committee to hold private meetings as necessary, e.g. with independent auditors. Typically, such exemptions already exist for meetings involving personnel-related issues and the discussion of pending litigation.
Thank you. I think that captures it well. So we have a motion that's been made and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
No? Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that unless someone wants to present an argument on the non-attest versus audit services, that it was the other major distinction between the two RFPs, then I'm ready to move on to public comments. Yeah.
I would just add on that last vote, it was informative to read that. You know, I like the spirit of it, but it specifically says you're going to have an exemption from the right to know law, and we don't have that. So we would have to have that, as the deputy senior manager said, we'd have to have that discussion in public.
I think we could continue the conversation on that legal point, but that's beyond the scope of this committee. I think it's an important point to discuss, because I think what the GFOA booklet is going to, and I don't want to take any more time on this, but what the GFOA booklet is going to, I think, is the heart of this independent audit concept.
Right, but Chairman, we'd have to have the state legislate an exemption, which is just beyond our scope.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just suggest that keep in mind, you know, as we go through the selection process with hopefully a couple of firms, you know, there will be an opportunity to negotiate the contract. So there will be, you know, I know it's a big item for you, but in terms of the scope of all of the work that the auditor will actually do, if we need to have some conversation with the firm about what to include or not include for a number of meetings, I think that's something that could be further teased out once we're further in the process. And so I'm just putting that out there, that there's a little bit of time and space to come back and kind of look at this maybe afresh, and maybe there's a way to, you know.
Could be something we take up on the Legislative Affairs Committee.
Yeah, so nothing's out of the, you know, nothing's fixed here from my perspective.
Okay.
Because it's hey, could you have one more meeting kind of added to the scope?
Yes.
I just have a quick question before we move to public comment. On the question of non-attest in the bidding, what do we gain from having that separated out, given that I think the plan has been to have everything bundled?
So there's several points to that. From my conversations with various CPA firms, my understanding is that the accounting regulatory authorities are increasingly looking at trying to divide the non-attest from the audit services. By simply changing the RFP and asking for that additional information on price quotes, what we're essentially doing is gathering data which can be helpful to the audit committee in making decisions a year or 2 or 3 years in the future. And I think that it's important to be looking out that far in advance for putting the audit committee in a better position, the city council in a better position to make decisions regarding that. So it's simply an effort to try to develop a track record. And I understand the economies of scale and scope are critical. But I think that there is when these bidding firms know that they are submitting a competitive bid, that will cause them to sharpen their pencil perhaps more than what we saw this last year. And the numbers will be of value to the committee going forward. Okay? So anything else on that before we open it up for public comment? Okay, anyone wish to weigh in, please? Mitra.
Peter Huda, Portsmouth. First thing I'd like to clarify for the members who have not been on this committee since the beginning is, together with Deputy City Attorney at the time, Woodland, this RFP that you're using and have morphed into what we have now was developed with staff. And that was the staff, we actually used the attorneys to develop the staff, this, and then push it forward. So what I'm saying is the argument that staff should be doing this and putting it together, that was the beginning of this. So it was taken from a different format and actually developed with staff, both of us learning as we went along. So this is not like we previously or this audit committee has taken anything away or is trying to pull anything away from the basically purchasing department. This was done like that. And the original purpose of this whole thing was to assist the staff that didn't have total financial knowledge, which Deputy Attorney Woodland and I found out there was a lot to learn as far as what was actually in here and what they actually needed to do. So that was the development process, so you understand. The next thing I'd like to say is on page 2 of Attorney Woodland's introduction, personally, I don't see the need for the red item in the middle. The city has a standing audit committee that will be involved in the process. That is listed all throughout here. I think this is redundant. That's the only comment I have on there. I do have some concern on the one change that City Attorney Woodland made, not as to the governing body, but on number 9. The auditor shall be required to make immediate written report to discovery of material irregularities, illegal acts, and I think we need to be really careful here, or indications of illegal acts to the audit committee and city attorney. So my first, I guess, red flag here would be who makes the determination of indications here? I think you need to be careful because this could be construed as accusatory. The other question I would have is on this, the city attorney in this case, I don't know if they would have the financial background to know what is being told of them or what this indication actually means. So in this case, I guess I would ask you to think about, I guess, financial staff or bringing in the highest level of financial staff to discuss this before making any accusations. The thing on this is part of something that could stop the audit. To Mr. Lynch's point, things happen, or auditors come across any kind of irregularities or illegal acts is strong, but when they look at the numbers, they could tell what exactly is going on, what the flow is and everything else. If they find something or an issue that they cannot resolve without going or coming to either the audit committee or staff or having a meeting on this without staff, it should be noted that that's probably why the GFOA puts that in there. And that could happen at any time in the audit. The other thing that I would like to remind you is you need to, and this is hard to do, account for all the situations that possibly could happen here. Yes, we want a wonderful audit, we want a shining report, and it's going to be handed to the city council. If that is not the case, especially with different auditors looking at different things, and I'll address the non-attest services in a minute on that note. Different firms, this is all auditing, but different firms do different methods of testing and are used to different levels of risk. You have to account for all of that in your thinking and what you're putting in here when you actually make that statement. And that's all I'll say about that. On Attorney Woodland's suggestion that the two services overlap in the discussion with non-attest and audit, I would disagree on that. The two services do not overlap. The first service, the non-attest services, is completing the financial statement preparation process, including adjusting entries, eliminating entries, taking it to cash, and consolidating the whole system. That has to be done before an auditor could come in and say, this is done right. So the two of them do not overlap. They are different services. So from my perspective, I would say that having put the bid in there for both of them, and you'll probably get a discount, just like was discussed, if they do the both of them. But in looking forward, as Chairman White said, if the regulatory agencies are going this way anyway, where they want to see more independence and more separation of the duties that have to be done here to get to the end product, this is a good opportunity to start there. The other thing on this is this was a very, I guess, this was one of the points of contention that we had in the last audit, where this was discussed as non-attest services. The audit committee came up with one RFP and discussed it in the audit committee discussion, and it did not include the non-attest services. And then outside of that, city staff went out and discussed it with vendors that already had previous knowledge of everything. So this would also prevent that. It would just outline what needed to be done and in what order it should be done. I guess the other thing on here, when Councilor Cook said something about the council or the auditor is here to do a job and we're going to hire the best. Yes, we're obviously going to hire the best firm. They obviously know what they're doing. This is what they do for a living. But to have it laid out for the protection of the city, to say this is what our process is, this is what our intent is, lays it out in the beginning and out front. And the RFP is the total RFP is the basis for the contract. And right now, whether the audit committee reviews the final contract and verifies and validates that all of the provisions in the RFP were followed is not really clear to me. And it wasn't clear, and it didn't happen last year. It had to be requested. So that would be the other comment I have. The only other comment I have, sitting back and looking at this from an audit firm perspective, you're asking for a return in October. I would just say this is a little early. Audit firms will be doing their staffing for the next year, November, December, January, as we have seen prior. So that would be my only other note. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Bill? You're past Roy, or you?
Do you want to check Zoom?
Please, yep.
Looks like
Robin has some comments.
you want to unmute.
Yes. Robin Russo, CPA. And I'm telling you that because I want to give you background on where my comments are coming from. I have advised various boards of directors and audit committees in my career as an auditor for Grant Thornton, Ernst & Young, and PwC. I've done special investigations for audit committees. I still advise them. I'm advising a biotech company right now in Massachusetts, and I will be doing work for Grant Thornton in October. I've been vice president for the Institute of Internal Auditors for the state of New Hampshire. And I'm here today because I am hearing that this, quote, governance committee, this newly formed governance committee, is not wanting really an audit committee or independent members of an audit committee. They want city councilors only on an audit committee. So for public companies, an audit committee is comprised of the independent members of the board of directors for a reason. And the reason is, just as I'm watching this meeting today, that the city council members are advocating on behalf of management, and those that are really independent members of the audit committee are advocating for integrity and transparency and integrity in the process, which is very important because our city right now really is the size of a mid-cap public company. And there are complex financial transactions, and Petra and her team had sort of a good decision to put together an audit committee and get members from the public, the city of Portsmouth. And we have plenty of financial experts in the city of Portsmouth, and I hope more come forward because we need them, and we're thankful that they're volunteering their time and their amazing years of experience to step into this role. The role of an audit committee is an oversight committee. They are the oversight committee of the management team. They're not here to just kick the tires a little bit. And no, it is not the city council who basically is who the audit firms report to. It's an audit committee first. They don't go to the board of directors first. They go to the audit committee first. And if there are any issues regarding fraud, the audit committee would do an investigation of that and then report to the board of directors. I'm sorry, I'm like interrupting notes from class.
Sorry.
So I'm here to say that I'm very thankful for this audit committee, and also it's very appropriate, as I was listening to your meeting, for the audit committee to design the RFP and hand it off to management, tell management what they want to accomplish, not the other way around. Unfortunately, I'm hearing and I'm seeing that management is trying to tell the audit committee what to do. I don't think they have the expertise to do that. They certainly don't have the expertise to trump the financial experts on the committee. And I can't agree more with all of the points that the chair of the audit committee made as far as the oversight and the RFP process. And maybe if he wants to go into a private session during the oversight of the financial that come up. And that is their responsibility, to ask the tough questions on behalf of the people of the city of Portsmouth, looking at those financial statements and maybe kicking them back to the management team to make changes, or kicking them back or asking the questions of the audit firms in the process. That is the job of an audit committee before it gets to the city council. There's no one I know on the city council that are financial experts by any measure. They're not supposed to be. They're average people from our community. So when we have financial experts available and they've given us their time, we need to be thankful for that and allow them to do what they need to do, and don't try to usurp what they're doing, because they've done a lot of homework on what the responsibility of an audit committee is, and they're doing the right thing. Unfortunately, I'm seeing city council members here advocating for a management team, that really doesn't have a lot of financial expertise if they're allowing their external audit firm to put together their financial statements. And yes, you need to do different pricing for non-attest services and attest services. They should be very separate by separate firms if you're going to have independence. Right now you have no independence. So really your auditor is auditing themselves. And that should give no comfort to anyone in the city of Portsmouth. So hopefully we can have some change in that direction and have a real independent audit, and maybe have an audit firm that hasn't been around for 25 years. That's not appropriate. That particular audit firm that we have now audits every major city in the state of New Hampshire. That's a red flag. That's an audit and fraud red flag to someone like me. And when you have the city management trying to tell our audit committee, you can't talk to the external audit firms putting in RFPs. You can't talk to the partners. You can't talk to them. Why? What are you trying to hide? That is a red flag to any auditor. So you need to watch that. And you need to consider yourself lucky as city councilors that you have an audit committee of financial experts who are willing to volunteer their free time to make sure our financial situation is in good standing. Because right now, there's some big fat question marks. There's question marks as to the likes of me, who's been doing this for over 25 years. So thank you to the audit committee of the city of Portsmouth, and I hope we keep them, because if we don't, that's a red flag to the next auditor. If you get rid of your audit committee or only put city councilors on the audit committee, that's a fraud red flag. Have a great day.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Robin. Any other comments?
I would just say here, here.
Thank you, Bill. Okay. We had the, Suzanne, we're still looking at the February 8th and 10th non-publics. You want to handle that another time?
Here, let me, yeah, I'm supposed to be in another meeting, which is why Bob left.
Yeah.
I borrowed someone's. So. I'm not having, major heartburn about unsealing those. I don't,
Terrific.
normally I would wait until after we'd finished, but I know there's a different kind of agenda and interest, so, but like I said, there's what I would prefer to do, but I'm not having real concerns about this, given what's already been disclosed and we made available to all the parties that asked the copies of the proposals that were submitted by each firm.
Right.
So,
Good, okay, thank you. So if I could get a motion, please, to unseal the sealed minutes of February 8 and 10.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. That really helps clean up a lot of stuff.
Good, that's good.
Okay, I think the last item of business on our agenda is adjournment then.
I move that we adjourn.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. So that is